2027. That's the date predicted by many senior American defense officials for a war with China. The conflict is seen by many as inevitable, and the U.S. has been preparing for its eventuality since President Obama announced the U.S.'s pivot to the Pacific during his second term. Since then, the majority of U.S. naval power has been either repositioned to the Pacific or within easy reach of it, and the U.S. Air Force remains ready to rapidly deploy across an ever-expanding network of bases in the region from which to take the war to China directly. At the heart of the conflict is Taiwan, which could prove to be the most important nation of the 21st century. The island nation is smaller than California, but ranks 21st in GDP worldwide. It's a flourishing democracy situated just 80 miles from one of the most hostile states to global democracies anywhere in the world, and one with the power to challenge Taiwan and anyone who tries to defend it. But the fate of Taiwan isn't just a clash of deals between authoritarianism and democracy, though that too is increasingly important. Since the mid-2010s, the world has been steadily pivoting toward an increasing autocratic bent, thanks to the influence of Russia and China. Both powers who know that the continued survival of their autocratic ruling leaders depends entirely on them recreating the post-World War II liberal world order led by the United States, but with them at the helm. For the Chinese Communist Party, facing increasing criticism both at home and abroad, for everything from the genocide of the Uyghur minority to the stripping away of Chinese personal freedoms, reshaping the world in its own authoritarian image is its only guarantee of survival. To that end, Taiwan is a stumbling block that must be removed. The island democracy sits right off its own shore, and its deep economic and cultural ties to China is an avenue for the spread of pro-democratic sentiments amongst the Chinese people. The island has significant strategic value for both economic and military reasons, though. As most know by now, Taiwan is the world's leading manufacturer of advanced computer microchips, something referred to as Taiwan's Silicon Shield. After the United States began seeking ways to produce chips abroad more cheaply in the latter part of the Cold War and ended most of its domestic production, Taiwan saw an opportunity, and today the nation produces most of the world's microchips and nearly all of the most advanced chips. These chips are as important to modern economies as the trade of spices once was to the global powers in the past ages. It's not just extremely lucrative, but a modern technological economy literally depends on them. Without access to Taiwan's advanced microchips, a nation's economy would be severely impacted. One only need to look to Russia for the effects. The nation has only two companies capable of mass-producing processors, MCST and Baikal Electronics. Both companies worked closely with Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, producing 28 and more modern 16-nanometer chips, though the 16-nanometer chips never hit mass production. Baikal had plans to introduce next-generation processors inside Russia starting in 2023, but with Taiwan following the lead of Western sanctions against Russia, the effort never materialized. Now Russia is only able to produce the much older, less capable microprocessors and specialized processors for use in military applications. The end result is Russia has been locked out of access to modern microchips, and the small amount it's able to smuggle through sanction-busting efforts or with the help of China is not enough to sustain Russian efforts to remain competitive against modern information-driven economies. The effect is also devastating for the Russian defense sector, with its efforts to develop an advanced AI crippled due to a lack of access to advanced microchips. Even if the nation's able to somehow develop homegrown capabilities, an extreme unlikelihood given that Russia's always lagged behind the West in microchip design, it still faces issues with the import of materials needed to create the microchips. In early 2023, Rostec announced it would begin producing its own 150mm and 200mm silicon wafers, yet being cut off from access to the polycrystalline silicon it once purchased from the West resulted in it being unclear by the end of the year when Rostec would actually begin production. China, as a state hostile to Taiwan's existence, is already feeling the pinch of losing access to advanced microchips. President Joe Biden, in conjunction with Japan and the Netherlands, instituted a microchip ban to significantly limit the export of advanced microchips and machining tools to China in an effort to slow its development of advanced AI. China currently produces 7nm and 5nm chips domestically, but mostly using foreign equipment that it does not own and whose use could be revoked at any time. South Korea, for example, had to seek U.S. permission to continue production of microchips inside of China, or suffer the effect of secondary sanctions against it. At the moment, though, China does not have access to 3nm chips, the world's most advanced, and critical to efforts to develop artificial intelligence. Only Taiwan is currently producing these chips, though President Biden has negotiated the expansion of Taiwan's manufacturing of those chips to mainland U.S. Taiwan was extremely reluctant to do so, because so far its ability to produce these chips at home has worked to both fend off the Chinese aggression and ensure U.S. defense. Seizing Taiwan's microchip production facilities is of paramount importance to China in case of invasion, and it's just as important to the United States that China not gain control of those facilities. With an iron grip on the production of the world's most advanced microchips, China would gain massive economic leverage over the entire world. Leverage that it could, and given its history would use, to coerce nations to behave how it wants them to, or to give in to Chinese demands. For the US, this isn't just an economic threat, but a threat to the entire rules-based liberal world order. It also threatens to cripple US efforts to build advanced new technologies while fueling Chinese development. Taiwan is important for a third reason, though, and this is far more practical. Today, the island nation sits right in the middle of what's called the First Island Chain. The FIC is a line drawn between Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines and represents the single greatest deterrent to Chinese aggression. With friendly nations making up the First Island Chain, the US and its allies can easily contain the Chinese Navy, and thus its military. Any attempt to deploy Chinese fleets out of the South China Sea in a time of war would see them under attack from multiple directions, and China's ability to utilize its submarine fleet would also be severely constrained by the defenses of the FIC. Currently, Chinese subs must run a gauntlet of underwater sensors, friendly air patrols, and allied submarines on the hunt, and it is very limited on just where China can move its submarines with any hope of remaining undetected. For the entirety of the Cold War and into the modern age, the First Island Chain has contained communist powers in Asia, while preventing them from projecting military power far from home. For this reason, taking Taiwan is of critical importance to the Chinese Communist Party, as it would allow them to effectively sever the First Island Chain. With a steep drop-off from Taiwan's east coast, which sits near the edge of the continental shelf into the depths of the Pacific, Chinese submarines could evade detection as they slip unseen into the Pacific. This places all American and Allied fleets and even land-based targets under threat thanks to an expanding fleet of ballistic missile submarines that can carry conventional cruise missiles. Of greatest concern, though, is the ability for China's nuclear-armed subs to patrol unseen and thus threaten a surprise nuclear strike against America or her allies. Can China really take Taiwan, though? And what will the US do if it does? Historically speaking, China's had no hope of taking Taiwan. During the Third Taiwan Strait crisis in the mid-1990s, the United States sailed a carrier strike group through the Taiwan Strait as a show of force. The Chinese military was utterly humiliated, knowing it could do nothing to counter the threat posed by even a single American strike group sailing just 24 miles off its own shore. The Chinese Communist Party vowed to never be humiliated again, and in the years after undertook a massive modernization and armament effort that's lasted to this day. Today, China officially controls the world's largest navy, though it still lags significantly behind the United States in sheer tonnage, at just over half the total tonnage of the US. In fact, China is not a blue water navy with the ability to deploy far from home shores. Its lack of aircraft carriers and naval aircraft, as well as marine expeditionary forces and support ships, make it impossible for China to threaten anywhere in the world that it's not already given free access to. But it doesn't really have to have a blue water navy to win in Taiwan, and it doesn't need to outweigh the US Navy either. A war for Taiwan would take place close to home for China, within easy reach of its large air force, which would make up for its abysmal lack of naval aviation. Those aircraft would also operate under the safety of both shore and sea-based air defenses, presenting an incredibly prickly problem for the US and its allies to deal with in a war over the skies of Taiwan. China's larger fleet of cruisers and smaller hulls would be well suited for the shallower waters of the Taiwan Strait itself, which would likely be entirely too dangerous for the US submarines to operate in. Shore-based anti-ship defenses also promise to make it almost impossible for the US to operate major surface platforms anywhere close to the Chinese coast for at least the first few months of the war, at least until China's supply of anti-ship missiles begins to run out. There is thus a very real possibility that China's smaller, nimbler navy is more than capable of defeating the US Navy in a battle for Taiwan. And that's without accounting for the fact that the United States is not able to bring the entirety of its naval forces into the fight in the first place. Global security commitments, mean that the U.S. can only supplement its Pacific Fleet with a limited number of ships and aviation from other global theaters. A lapse in U.S. presence in the Middle East, for example, could encourage Iran to take action against Saudi Arabia or even Israel, potentially leading to a global crisis. The one area other than naval aviation that China's been lacking in for a successful invasion of Taiwan, though, is its amphibious assault capabilities. China has 72 older landing ships currently in service, along with 8 amphibious transport docks and 3 landing helicopter dock ships. It's expanding its fleet of amphibious assault ships with new modern designs, and by 2027 it's estimated to at last have the capacity to move large enough amounts of men, equipment, and supplies for a successful landing in Taiwan. A successful landing does not guarantee victory, but it does allow China to begin to seize airfields and ports that can then be used to grow its foothold on the island. China's rapid expansion of its military has put a ticking clock on the invasion of Taiwan, and many see it as an alarm clock and not a possibility. Taiwan is a silent humiliation for the CCP, which claims to be a global superpower and yet is unable to annex a breakaway island nation right off its own shore. With a population bomb already exploding and a massive decline down to 900 million expected, with subsequent economic fallout, China's ability to take Taiwan comes with an expiration date, and so does the CCP itself if it fails to resolve the Taiwan question. Currently, the United States is confident that it and its allies can defend Taiwan. But what if they fail? Already, America's insulating itself against the possibility of a fall of Taiwan. President Biden's negotiation to move 3-nanometer chip manufacturing to the U.S. ensures that America will continue to produce advanced microchips even if Taiwanese facilities are seized by the CCP or destroyed in the fighting. Further, President Biden has invested considerably into domestic efforts to produce microchips and the rare earth minerals that China currently has a stranglehold on in the global economy. This is making America resilient versus the effects of both war with China and a failure to defend Taiwan. The second biggest issue for the U.S. in a post-successful invasion of Taiwan is the matter of containment of Chinese forces. With the first island chain broken, the Chinese Navy would largely be free to project Chinese power globally and would significantly complicate future wars against China. The vastness of the Pacific Ocean makes it difficult to track Chinese submarines, though space-based assets can easily locate, identify, and track major surface action groups. Locating them, though, is different from destroying them, especially if Chinese naval expansion continues at breakneck speed, while the U.S. faces a significant shortage of critical materials for replenishment of advanced weapon systems. The U.S. is already creating what it's deemed a ghost fleet. The American Navy aims to create a large fleet of unmanned vessels, specifically made to counter China's expanding numbers and the possibility of the collapse of the first island chain. As of the making of this video, 2 unmanned ships are currently undergoing trials in the Pacific alongside manned ships, and the goal is to expand the Ghost Fleet to 100 or more vessels. These ships will do everything from anti-submarine warfare, reconnaissance, and even serve as mobile batteries full of missiles to supplement manned ships. The second island chain serves as a fallback position from which to contain the Chinese Navy. The chain stretches from Japan's Bonin Islands down to Guam and Western New Guinea. In the event of a Chinese victory in Taiwan, the United States, Japan, the Philippines, and Australia would look to bolster the defenses and resiliency of the second island chain. It's likely that an additional defensive chain currently proposed would be adopted, this time stretching from Lakshadweep to Diego Garcia and toward the Persian Gulf, from which Chinese oil trade could be threatened. The U.S. is already building a strong relationship with India, and this relationship will be strengthened further if Taiwan falls. While the U.S. and India have never been particularly close, this relationship has seen a dramatic shift in recent years. Historically, India has been far more closely aligned with Russia and the Soviet Union before it. However, the war in Ukraine drove a wedge in that relationship, helped by the revelation of how poorly Russian weapons were performing against even small amounts of Western arms. As a major buyer of Russian weapons, India's confidence was deeply shaken by the failure of Russian missiles, aircraft, and tanks. And as it looks toward its border with China that is rapidly modernizing and today outclasses India militarily, the nation switched allegiances and now looks to the United States for a new source of arms. In particular, the failure of the Su-57 program helped convince India that it needed to look elsewhere for the technology to counter China's increasingly sophisticated air force. India was originally a partner in the development of the Su-57, but pulled completely out of the program when it realized that the Su-57 would fall significantly short of the aircraft it was being designed to compete with, the F-22 Raptor. This dealt a crippling blow to Russia's ability to produce the Su-57, given its financial woes, and to date the nation has produced nothing more than a token force of mostly demonstration aircraft. The fall of Taiwan would hasten the warming of relations between the US and India, as it would place India in a very precarious situation. With the US and its allies no longer containing Chinese fleets, they would be free to enter the Straits of Malacca and the Indian Ocean beyond. This would place Chinese warships off the coast of India, a precarious situation for the two rivals. The fall of Taiwan, however, would present other major problems for India and the rest of Southeast Asia, as it would significantly diminish US influence in the region. Without faith that America could deter Chinese aggression, let alone defend them in case of a war, many Southeast Asian nations would quickly fall in line with the Chinese Communist Party. Suddenly, India would find itself with China-aligned Pakistan on one flank, China to the north, and new Chinese partners on its eastern flank. Increasing partnerships between the Indian and American militaries aim to counter this threat, and the US would invest heavily into improving its partnership. Currently, India is not set to ever host US forces on its soil, but the fall of Taiwan and the collapse of its neighbors to Chinese influence could prompt wider Indian-American military cooperation that could see American forces being sent to India to help defend the nation and keep the Indian Ocean clear of Chinese fleets. Ultimately, the fall of Taiwan would threaten the entire global world order that's created the calmest stretch of time in all of human history. The best preparation that America and its allies can undertake for a fall of Taiwan is to ensure that it never falls in the first place. Now go check out China's brand new aircraft carrier versus USS Gerald R. Ford supercarrier. Who would win? Or click this other video instead.